Hello. I hope you had a good reading month in September. I have to admit, I had a quite chaotic reading month in that the first half of the month I was very busy with work, so didn't have all that much reading time. And then in the second half of the month, I went on holiday for over 2 weeks, and so was traveling around, and so was reading quite a lot of things aloud to my husband, but not so much on my own. So actually, the first books I want to talk about that I read last month, I've read part of them. I've not read the entire things, but I've read sections of these books aloud to my husband, and it was really enjoyable doing that. You know, reading aloud a book gives such a different experience of a text than, you know, just reading it on your own. And a number of these things, they're sort of nonfiction books, and so quite interesting factual information that are also really engaging reading experiences. And so we went on a trip around the Pacific Northwest in the United States, and we picked up this book in Powell's Bookshop in Portland while we were traveling through, because it's about the region, and we wanted to read something about the region. So this is a book called The Good Rain by Timothy Egan, who was a journalist, and this was published actually in 1990, and it's different accounts of different parts of the Pacific Northwest, not only capturing the beauty and uniqueness of that region, but also the kind of sociology of the region, looking at the history of it, how it developed in tandem with each other. And we, in particular, read a chapter to do with the city of Seattle right before we went to visit that, because we wanted to know a bit more about the history of that city. And it was so fascinating reading about this. He writes in a really engaging and fun way about these regions and his explorations of them, and understanding of the history of them, as well as the people who live there. He meets a number of different personalities and really brings that out. And something I didn't realize is the city of Seattle is named after a Native American chief who was born there in the region called Chief Seahal. And so Seattle is a kind of anglicized bastardization of that name. And and he gives so many interesting facts about the development of the city, how it started as a very small town, gradually developed over time, went through some like big growth spurts, and then had some very uneven, development around that. Like, I think a lot of cities then become very uneasy about their growth, but also because Seattle was seen as like one of the sort of last frontiers in the American, sense of like moving west and creating new communities and finding new territory. And so people that had settled in Seattle then over time became very guarded about it, and about not wanting outsiders to come into the city and to sort of level it and then create it anew. And so he talks about that uneasy development in a really interesting way. And obviously this was published in 1990, and so it was specific to that time when the city was undergoing growth. And since then it's undergone a lot more growth, and sort of tech entrepreneurs who have like come in to the city since then, but how there are a number of aspects of the city which have been preserved, like the marketplace on the wharf and the coastline, and how that has continued, though at a certain point that was almost leveled, and sort of skyscrapers were going to be put in, and there are some modern aspects of the city, but then there are some also historic aspects to the city. So it was really interesting learning about all of that while then going and seeing the city for ourselves, using as a bookmark our pass to Olympic National Park, which we went to after going to Seattle. I also read aloud to him some different nonfiction accounts of animals. I have two different books about animals, one which came out fairly recently, On Animals by Susan Orlean, and The Golden Mole by Katherine Rundell, which was actually only just published. And so On Animals, Susan Orlean, the great nonfiction writer, she is really obsessed with animals. There's this whole introduction about how she has had a real passion for animals throughout all of her life and wanted to own a number of different animals. And she goes in the different chapters into different accounts of specific animals, but also specific historical incidents to do with those animals. So there's one section all about the whale that starred in the film Free Willy and the whole complication behind that killer whale and its history, and how after the film came out there was a lot of outcry from the public wanting this whale to be freed, actually freed like it was talked about in the movie, back into the wild. But because this animal, almost from its infancy, had been raised in captivity, there was a lot of complications to do with that. And so then the long and very expensive process of trying to free this whale back out into the wild and all the complications to do with that. And there's another section to do with a particular dog at a dog show that she went and followed and kind of interviewed or like spent some time with, getting to know, and the whole weird world of dog shows and and groomers who like get so into this. And if you've ever seen the movie Best in Show, I mean, I think it's really like that in a lot of ways. A lot of the owners of these animals get very, very into this. And there's another section all about taxidermy and the history of taxidermy and how that's a whole other subset of society. Another chapter all about big cats in America and just how many big cats are in America, and how some of the owners of these sort of wildlife reservations, the difficult conditions of them. And she talks about one particular incident of an adult lion that was just found roaming around in a town, and the question of where this lion came from, and just how scary that was, and all the complications of that. So and another chapter all about rabbits and the specific virus that has been going around amongst both wild and tamed rabbits, rabbits that are kept for pets, the population of rabbits all around the world, and how this is a real recent occurrence. I mean, it's been going on for a while, but specifically recently, how there's been this particular strain of the virus going around, and how that's been developing in tandem with the recent COVID outbreak. And it's completely separate from that, but it's an issue that's been happening in tandem with that, and how it's really ravaging a lot of wild rabbit communities, but also the complications of dealing with this virus because of the specific classification of rabbits in America, that they are both domestic pets but also raised for meat and for slaughter, and so they don't really fit into either one of protection for animal category or the disease control center of how they handle that. And so a lot of really interesting factual information, but the way she writes is so engaging and idiosyncratic. She picks out all these weird fun little facts about animals and things to do with animals, and it's really a pleasure to read aloud some sections of this book. The Golden Mole is a book that's a nonfiction book that's kind of in a similar vein to On Animals, in that there are different chapters looking at specific animals, specifically very unique animals in the world. The very first chapter is all about wombats, and I have a really strange wombat obsession. I just love wombats, and I love watching documentary programs about wombats, these like curious marsupials of Australia and Tasmania, and how I mean they're so cute, but just also I love their individuality, and how solitary they live, except for when the mothers give birth to joeys, and then the close bond of I just love seeing how joeys will follow so close behind their mothers, and so anyway, the first chapter of this is all about wombats, and but then there are other chapters also about the oldest shark in the world, and how it can be hundreds of years old and live in the deep and has a very mysterious existence. There are also chapters about lemurs and hermit crabs and bears, and of course the golden mole from the title of this book. And what is so wonderful about her writing and really engaging about her writing is she shows the wondrous qualities of these animals. I mean, they're almost things out of fantasy that you wouldn't believe existed, but they do exist, and that seems like a kind of miracle. And she writes about them in such an engaging way that really draws you into wanting to learn more about these animals. And she ends each section also talking about environmental difficulties that these animals are facing, and how their population is really under threat. And so it's kind of a rallying call to want to preserve these wondrous creatures in the world. And Katherine Rundell is such an interesting writer. I mean, she's it's so idiosyncratic, the subject she writes about, because so there's this new book about animals, but she'd also written a nonfiction book called Super Infinite, about a biographical account about the life of the poet John Donne, which I read earlier this year, and was such a wonderful experience. I just love her writing style. Now, while on this trip, I also read the entirety of the new novel The Perfect Golden Circle by Benjamin Myers, and this novel is set in 1989 during a very hot summer, and there are two idiosyncratic individuals that kind of live on the fringes of society, and they have this artistic mission together. They're not even necessarily good friends, but they have this strong connection with each other, and their friendship does develop more over time, over the course of this summer, as they embark on this mission to create these mysterious crop circles in different fields around England during the summer. And so this is an idea they get where one of them has more artistic ideas about how these circles can be formed and created in the patterns of them, and the other one is much more pragmatic about how these circles can be created, and picking out locations for these different crop circles that they make, and they do them under the cover of night, and they form them in a way which doesn't damage the crops, but just sort of presses them down in a way to create these patterns within these fields. And so as they go on and create more of these patterns, there's a public interest of where these crop circles coming from. Are they alien, or are they created through some other mysterious means? And so there's a kind of cult that develops around them, and their purpose for creating them is not entirely clear. It is a artistic mission. There's they're just sort of making them for the joy of it, and to instill a sense of wonder in the country, and a sense of mystery and excitement, and so you follow them as they go about creating these things and learn more about each of their characters. One of them is a veteran of the Falklands War, and so has very specific ideas and their ramifications from his fighting in that war, and so that he has specific ideas about society and how it's being run, and the other man also is kind of counterculture in a way, or he like finds his own way of like existing in society and having different relationships with people, which in a kind of unconventional way, and yeah, both of them I grew to feel this warm affection for both of these men, and also their mission of what they're doing. But as it goes along and they create more of these circles, there's more it creates more complications, because some of these locations, they use it as a sort of capitalist way of trying to charge people to come in and see these crop circles as more interest develops in them. And so yeah, it's really interesting following this. And Benjamin Myers, I've read a couple of his books before. He writes so beautifully about the natural world, and of course there's a lot of detail in this about the countryside in Britain, but also the real beauty of the communities in these different locations that they go to, and how they meet some particular individuals during these nights when they're conducting these experiments. Some really horrible individuals, other individuals that also sort of exist on the fringes of society and don't quite fit into the mainstream. And yeah, it's just it was a really wonderful reading experience. I think it's a really gorgeous novel, and I enjoyed reading it so much. While I was on holiday, I also started reading the Schoolhouse by Sophie Ward, which is a very different novel from her first novel, Love and Other Thought Experiments. And this novel is about a deaf woman that attends an experimental school in the 1970s in North London, and but then in the present day there's a girl that goes missing, and this woman gets a letter from a former teacher of hers, which brings back all these memories of her past and uneven development at this experimental school. And there's an investigation into what happened to this girl. So you're following these different strands of the narrative, looking at some journals she wrote when she was at this experimental school in the 1970s, but then also the following the ongoing investigation that's looking into what happened to this girl and her interactions and interviews with this deaf librarian who attended this schoolhouse, and something that she thinks she saw in the library. And so yeah, you follow these different accounts, and I'm about halfway through reading this book. I'm finding it a somewhat uneven experience in that I'm really enjoying the sections which are in the investigation of what happened to this girl. It's quite suspenseful, the discoveries that are made in trying to piece together what happened on the day of her disappearance. But then there are some sections which are the journals, which I'm finding it less engaging to read about, because even though I know they're giving hints and clues about her experiences there, but also the mysterious goings on at this school, but it's also just a kind of, in a lot of ways, the straightforward, like, teenage girls journalistic account, which isn't all that interesting. I mean, it seems quite realistic and it's convincing in that way, but it's just not as engaging as I would like to read about. So I'm finding myself almost like speeding through those sections and wanting to get back to the more investigative bits. But yeah, Sophie Ward does write in a really enjoyable and pleasurable way, and how she's developing this mystery, I do want to know what happens. And finally, in September, I read a couple of books in their entirety, which I made separate videos about, so I'm not going to go into too many details about these books. But Maps of Our Spectacular Bodies, yeah, what a wonderful, engaging novel that gives such a different perspective on the body and the experience of illness, and how that occurs in a family, and the ramifications of that for the different individuals that are connected with it. And yeah, I'm still reeling at how beautiful she writes this, and to give this perspective on a body that's almost been taken possession of by this disease, and the voice of that disease, which then morphs and changes over the course of the narrative. It's really given me such a different and unique perspective that I just completely adored this book. And then there is Lucy by the Sea by Elizabeth Strout, the latest installment of Lucy Barton's story, which I read in its entirety aloud to my husband while we were driving around the Pacific Northwest, and such a pleasurable experience reading this aloud. And there are so many sections where Lucy is having exchanges with people, so reading that aloud, really brought these conversations to life, and sort of the humor of these interactions, or the poignancies of these interactions. I think it really emphasized that aspect of the story. There are also sections of the book which I found so touching, where Lucy has created this fictional mother for herself because she had such a difficult relationship with her real mother. She has what she terms her nice mother in her mind, that she will speak to at some points in moments of crisis when she doesn't really know what to do in her life, and how she's speaking out to this mother and looking for guidance and reassurance. I thought was so touching and moving. That was a really beautiful aspect of the story. But following her through the crisis of the recent pandemic, and how she deals with that, how she for quite a while is sort of denying it and doesn't believe that this is actually happening, but then it does, and there are real world consequences to it, and that affect people that she knows in her life to do personally, and how this is so wrapped up in the political conflicts in the United States at this time. And it's really artfully done and beautiful, and completely drew me back into Lucy Barton's story, both her personal history, but also her perspective on the world today. So this was such a wonderful reading experience, and really great to read it aloud, and my husband really enjoyed it too. I did film some things while I was there in the United States, and I've been thinking about putting together like a vlog about it. I'm hoping to do that soon. If you want me to make that video and post it, and let me know about that, because I think it'll be quite a time-consuming thing. But it was quite a bookish journey, so I filmed a lot of bookish scenes about that, but also a lot of the beauty of the Pacific Northwest that we saw when we were traveling there. Some of the fun things we encountered while we were there. So it was a wonderful time, and I hope to put together a vlog about that. But those are things I read that last month. I'm hoping to have a slightly more organized reading schedule this month. There's lots of things I'm already reading and getting to in October, but I'd love to know if you've read any of these books, if you have any thoughts or feelings about them, or anything I've said about them, or if you're interested in reading them now, or let me know about some of the best or worst things that you read last month in September. But I hope you're doing well and reading good things, and I will speak to you again soon. Bye bye.